Four sons of El Chapo face sweeping new charges in fentanyl indictments. Federal officials announced a flurry of charges on Friday against the four sons of the notorious Mexican drug lord known as El Chapo, saying the men were leading their imprisoned father's empire and were responsible for moving vast quantities of fentanyl into and throughout the United States. Attorney General Merrick B. Garland said at a news conference in Washington that in addition to the four sons collectively known as Los Chapitos, federal indictments in Manhattan, Chicago and Washington had charged more than 24 other people in what he described as a global fentanyl manufacturing and distribution operation run by the Sinaloa drug cartel. El Chapo, whose real name is Joaquin Guzman Loera, led the organization for years and after his conviction in Brooklyn in 2019 is serving life in prison in the United States. Mr. Garland said the defendants named in the 5 separate indictments included suppliers in China who sold so-called precursor chemicals used in manufacturing fentanyl, a broker based in Guatemala who bought the chemicals on behalf of the Chapitos, operators of clandestine fentanyl labs in Mexico, and a weapons supplier who provided the cartel with weapons smuggled into Mexico from the United States. The indictments, taken together, provided a panoramic view of how fentanyl was created, transported and ultimately sold on the street in cities from New York to Nashville to Los Angeles. The charges noted that the fentanyl business earned the cartel millions of dollars while causing as many as 200 deaths in the United States each day. The Justice Department is attacking every aspect of the cartel's operations, Mr. Garland said. The charges also gave a flavor of the violence and terror that has ravaged Mexico for years and supported the Sinaloa cartel's fentanyl business. The indictment said that assassins working for Mr. Guzman's sons murdered law enforcement officers, tortured rivals with electrocution, stuffed chilies into the wounds of some of their victims and even fed others both dead and alive to their pet tigers. Ann Milgram, the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, said at the news conference that the sons had inherited their father's global drug trafficking empire and transformed it by pioneering a novel product. They made it more ruthless, more violent, more deadly, and they used it to spread a new poison, fentanyl, Ms. Milgram said. A lawyer for the four sons declined to comment on the new charges. The new indictments came at a moment of a high tension between U.S. and Mexican officials over their deteriorating law enforcement relationship and in particular, the issue of who was to blame for the scourge of fentanyl. Ms. Milgram lashed out in February at the Mexican government, complaining that officials there had offered no assistance to U.S. agents working on cases involving fentanyl from Mexico. Within weeks, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico shot back with baseless claims that his country had nothing to do with the drug. "Here, we do not produce fentanyl," he said. At his news conference, Mr. Garland said directly, the Sinaloa cartel is largely responsible for the surge of fentanyl into the United States over the last 8 years. He credited the Mexican government for its cooperation in the U.S. effort, saying that Justice Department officials had met in Washington on Thursday with Mexico's Secretaries of Defense and Interior Security, its Attorney General and its Foreign Minister. The indictments unsealed on Friday were not the first charges brought against Mr. Guzman's sons. Like their father, who was charged in 7 cases in 7 cities before his eventual conviction in federal district court in Brooklyn, they are now facing multiple indictments in several jurisdictions. One of the sons, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, was facing charges with his brother Joaquin Guzman Lopez, unsealed in federal district court in Washington in 2019, days after their father was found guilty. Long known as the least accomplished of Mr. Guzman's children, Ovidio Guzman Lopez was arrested by the Mexican authorities in January in Culiacán, a northwestern city that has served for decades as the home base of the Sinaloa cartel. 2 of Mr. Guzman's other sons by a different wife, Ivan Archibaldo Guzman Salazar and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, were named on Friday in 2 separate indictments in Chicago and Manhattan. The Chicago case also included Joaquin Guzman Lopez as a defendant. Ivan was already facing charges filed in 2014 in San Diego, and Jesus Alfredo had been charged in 2015 in Chicago. Both remain at large in Mexico, as does Joaquin. The sons took control of a faction of their father's fractured empire after his extradition to the United States in 2017, on the day before Donald J. Trump took office. Often derided in the Mexican news media as playboys and unworthy successors to the family patriarch, they nonetheless created a thriving trade in fentanyl, U.S. law enforcement officials say, while navigating the treacherous relations with other top cartel figures, including Mr. Guzman's brother, Aurelio, and his longtime business partner, Ishmael Zambada Garcia. The trial of Mr. Guzman, which sprawled over 3 months, laid bare the depravity at the heart of the Sinaloa cartel as witnesses described how its assassins seared people with irons and burned them alive in bonfires. The new indictments painted Mr. Guzman's sons in a similar light. They accused Ivan of telling his associates that the cartel wanted to flood the United States with fentanyl in order to supply streets of junkies and noted that the cartel sometimes tested its product on bound captives. The indictments also said that assassins loyal to the Sons had gone to great lengths to prevent their arrests, including drawing the Mexican military into gunfights, killing soldiers, and burning vehicles to create roadblocks. "We take aim at the Sinaloa cartel and the global network of death that feeds it," Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said at the news conference on Friday. Glenn Thrush contributed reporting.